I'm a picture book guy. So sometimes I need pictures to help me understand what we're doing here. I threw these together just to kind of illustrate how this is different than just writing a longer prompt, right? I can go to ChatGPT and I can keep adding and adding information. But the idea here is we want the user to show up and ask the question how they would ask the question, right? Simple, straightforward, natural language, not expect them to write out an entire prompt. And so today, when you are interacting with a chat assistant that is not using retrieval augmented generation or RAG, what's happening is users coming asking a prompt, right? And then we're sending that to the LLM. LLM has no access to my documents, my internal help sites, my PDFs, my PowerPoints, all that kind of information. So all it does is respond with what it knows. Brian covered the problems of that. There's hallucination a lot of the time. It's going to confidently answer the question, whether it's right or not. And then these models have been trained up to a certain point. So they have big knowledge cutoffs. And so they don't have access to the latest policies, latest documents. Even if your information is on the internet, it might have not made it into the latest foundation or LLM that's out there. So the way that we shift this with RAG is we are breaking down that barrier between the LLM and our documents, right? So we're saying now we can take those documents, vectorize them, put them into a vector database. User comes and asks the question that they have. And the first thing we do with that prompt now is bypass it, not go to the LLM, but go to the vector database and say, do you have relevant information based on what this user's question was? And then that context that gets found in the vector database is appended to the user's original question, and we construct the prompt for them behind the scenes without them needing to know or be aware of that, and then bundle that up and send it to the LLM. So now Ryan showed the example of using the last 4 quarters of financial data to answer this question. We've constructed all that for them, and all they did was come and ask what are the financial results from the last quarter, right? So now when the LLM responds, it can provide much more detailed and accurate information to that question that was asked. And as we talked about, it can cite the source. It can say, here's where I got the answer, not just from my general corpus of knowledge, right?
And importantly, if it doesn't have the answer, it can also say, I don't know.
I don't know, yeah.
Which is just amazing to get an LLM to say that.
Yeah, I know, yeah. If you don't, without some of these RAG infrastructures in place, like I said, these are effectively just glorified predicted next word generators, right? All it's doing is saying, what is the next word in my sequence? And at some point stop. So it will ramble on whether it knows the answer or not and spit something out. And so
which is not surprising for something trained on the internet, to be honest.
Exactly.
But, yeah.
Yeah, see, I think we all have been to Reddit, and some people confidently answer things incorrectly there, don't they?
Well,
so,
actually.
Yeah. So the one last example I like to give before we flip over to the product is there's diverging kind of worlds when it comes to getting better answers from an LLM, right? We can go the retrieval augmented route, which is the route we're going to talk about today and which is important for enterprise applications of this. And then there is the fine-tuning route, where you're actually branching that LLM. You are now responsible for maintaining that version of the LLM, and you're effectively updating the parameters of it with information from your organization, your documents, right? So that can be useful. It's really good for doing specific tasks. Like we talked about SQL generation, right? Maybe you say, I want to be able to let someone type a SQL query and turn it into Python, right? That's where you might want to fine tune an LLM to be really good at that one specific thing. Downside of that is though, it's expensive, right? It requires that same tech debt, that load that you have to maintain. And there can be detrimental results in terms of the information that the LLM uses to respond. So something called catastrophic forgetting, right? And so I just like to show this fun example. Someone really did this experiment. They downloaded all their Slack messages, and they said, I have this great idea. I don't like writing all these papers and documents, so I'm just going to fine tune GPT and give it my Slack messages, and it will be able to talk like me. I can get it to do my writing tasks for me. So they did that, and the first thing they said was write a 500-word blog post on prompt engineering. And the LLM responded, sure, I'll do it in the morning. So it had learned the behavior of how they write Slack messages. So they said, no, write it now. And it just said, okay, and it didn't do anything. So it had forgotten all the good behaviors that we get out of an LLM for being original and coming up with creative content. And it had learned all the terseness of a Slack message, and therefore was no longer a very useful tool for these kind of things, right? Okay. Let's flip to a demo. Let's see some real products here. So we're going to start with answers. Okay, so we'll start the journey with creating an assistant. So sorry, I was going to have to log back in. I've been lingering. So we're going to come down here. We're going to create an assistant. We'll call this field day bot. Just for this purpose. I'm going to create a new knowledge base. I could also use an existing knowledge base. So if we had people come in and say, I want you to be responsible for creating the knowledge base with all the information about finance. And then you over here, you're responsible for creating the knowledge base around customer service policies. So we can have these people in there working side by side, building their knowledge bases and making those available through the assistants that we're building and delivering to customers. So we're going to build one from scratch just for the sake of demonstrating what that looks like. I'm going to go into my existing files, so I can either create a connection to certain data sources like SharePoint, SharePoint, S3, an SFTP site, wherever you might kind of be building these repositories of files, or we can use the existing data files that have been brought into the Qlik catalog. So if I've already kind of made those connections, brought that data in, maybe I'm using it for some other purposes, but I can tap into the work I've done there, or I can import new files. So I've added a presentation that I'm doing at Qlik Connect. So this is the presentation that I'll be doing on Wednesday around building machine learning data sets. So obviously this is built a couple weeks ago. It's not on the internet anywhere, and an LLM would have never learned about it. So this is all original content that I created that would not have been available to an LLM to be able to respond and give answers for. I'm actually going to demonstrate not putting that in and just going from here to show you what will happen if we now ask a question about something that it doesn't know. So I haven't added that presentation yet. So if I come in and say, how do I build a classification data set? Oops, I spelled data set wrong, but they're smart enough to figure out. You can see it came back and said, that's beyond the scope of my content. I don't have the ability to answer that because you have not curated that information in my knowledge base, right? So yeah.
What does it come with? What knowledge base does it have to start with?
So if you don't hook one up, there's no knowledge base at all here. Yeah. So
the LLM is just the user interface. It's the data set that's being.
Yeah, that's what's important. If you have not provided the contextual data for this LLM to use, it's not going to answer those questions because what we don't want to happen is someone to go ask a question. It uses the wrong answer from the internet that it saw somewhere, and it's not relevant to the policies of that organization.
So
right?
if you ask this, what's the capital of Kansas, what will it? That's usually how I test things.
Does anybody know? No, I was kidding.
Could be good.
Beyond my scope, right?
Okay,
so
good.
It's outside.
This is as vanilla of a clean room as one could
literally
have for a product
we can sit here and think of questions all day long. It's going to say the same thing every single time because we have not hooked up any.
It literally knows nothing right now.
Right now, it knows nothing. Right. So
It's not going to tell us anything.
Yeah, let's introduce data, right? So let's go into that knowledge base that we just created here. We're going to add a file. We're going to add that presentation that I had. We're going to tell it to index. So it's going to go ahead and start indexing that now. This is the process that Ryan talked about, the complexity of that. What just happened there? It just finished, right? What happened though is that we went through, we ingested that data, we chunked it, we broke it into relevant chunks of information, we did embeddings on those chunks, and then we stored that in a vector database and then connected to vector database. That all just happened in the background in the matter of a couple seconds, right?
And where is the vector database being stored?
It's in our Qlik Cloud.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, everything here is in our Qlik Cloud.
I've got several questions on this. What file types are supported?
Okay.
And how do you determine the chunking strategy? Is that something that you work with on a case-by-case basis with the customer based on their types of data information, how big the documents are?
Yeah.
Or is there kind of like an autopilot mode where it's just like most of the time this is the best chunking strategy and then tune from there?
Yeah. Today it's a fixed chunking strategy. So I don't know if there's anything to add, but we're using the same kind of method. I don't know if you know the size or overlap or anything like that off the top of your head, but yeah. So whatever kind of the general best practices we're applying there. File types, PDF, Word documents, PowerPoints, Markdown files, text files, rich RDF, JSON, XML. I think that's pretty inclusive.
Things too. We can point it to a SharePoint.
Yeah, absolutely. So just
Forgot what it was.
for demonstration
Vector database.
Yeah, for demonstration purposes, I have one here that we're building this for our own internal employees to use, right? Drinking our own champagne here. So the idea is to bring all of our competitive intelligence, all of our product information, all of our policies into a place that our salespeople can go and ask a
Any
question.
pricing information you're confident with yet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's and the idea here, you can see that's been dumped into SharePoint sites though, and I've connected to SharePoint sites here, and it's able to, on a schedule, continually monitor which ones are being updated, new documents being added, indexing those and bringing them in, but also not re-indexing stuff that hasn't changed, right? So it's just being efficient about only indexing new stuff or changed information, and I can point it to wherever those repositories are that might have that information, right?
So
Okay.
this, in fact, becomes the filter that to the LLM, right? So this is the, okay.
Exactly, yeah. So let's, now that we've added documents to this knowledge base, we can come back in here and let's just ask the same question, the first question I asked, right? Maybe I'll respell data set correctly this time. But I say, how do I build a classification data set? So now that we've added that information to the context, it's going to start answering the question. And it's getting this information from that PowerPoint that I had just put in there, right? So this is all, and so we can validate that by saying, well, what's the source you used? And so it's going to now load on the right side here the actual PowerPoint that it found that answer from, right? So it said, I found the answer in this PowerPoint, in your information, and that's how I answered my question. So you get the power of the LLM doing the summarization and the answering of the question, but with knowledge that came from a trusted source of information, my presentation in this case. Okay?
How does it determine how many different source documents or chunks effectively to put in there? Is that you're basing it on a probability that it's a close match?
Yeah, so the first thing we're gonna do is a top K search, right? So we're gonna say, go look in the vector database, find the top K number of relevant chunks that we think are important. The reality is though, that sometimes the top K chunk, the best chunk might be down at the bottom of that top K, right? Also, we might be looking at multiple knowledge bases, right, at the same time and getting information from those. So then we do something later called re-ranking, right, where we say, okay, we're gonna, now that we've got the top K chunks back, let's re-rank them to make sure the best, most relevant chunks are at the top, and then let's use the top 3 to answer the question, something like that, right?
Yeah, it's worth repeating at this point, this is a product.
This is a product, yep, yep.
Do the Kansas one again, please, just because I want to see if it knows anymore.
Yeah, that might have been somebody's email or in a PowerPoint somewhere.
Email data set structure.
Yeah, so there you go. So outside my scope, right? So it said, sorry, can't answer that question. It's outside of the content scope. Okay. So now we've demonstrated this, but now I can say, okay, well, what's the difference between Qlik and Power BI, right? So.
That's a hard
So here's the sales question, right? So it says, nope, don't have the answer to that. But now I go back to my overview here and I add a second knowledge base. So now I can say I do have that knowledge contained in another knowledge base that someone's curated for me. I can add that second knowledge base to the available answers content, right? So now it has access to 2 knowledge bases that it can get its information from. And I can ask that same question again here. And now it will hopefully use our competitive intelligence information to properly differentiate, at least from our perspective, right, what the key differences are between Power BI and Qlik, right? So you can see it's now answering that question and it cited its sources. So we can come in here and see, okay, it used, in this case, a web page that we have internally in our internal help doc that's not on the internet. And then I think we have like a battle card, a presentation about the comparing Power BI and Qlik. So again, it went and found the relevant documents with the answer to that question in there and brought those back and used them to answer the questions.
And you didn't have to wake a product manager or some competitive team up to answer that one salesperson's question at 4 a.m.
Yep.
Got it.
Yep.
Architecture-wise, because obviously people could be feeding in relatively sensitive information into this. Behind the scenes, how does this work architecturally? Is it a true multi-tenant model, or are you deploying individual kind of environments for customers?
Yeah, so this is using our shared cloud services. What's important to note though is we're only storing these documents if you're uploading them. Alternatively, if you are using SharePoint or an external data connection, then all we're doing is storing the index of that, right? So we're doing the indexing, we're doing the embeddings, we're storing the embeddings, and then this interaction's happening. So we're not actually duplicating that file and sticking it into our cloud. It's still inside of your environment. We've just indexed the chunk, right, with the answers that might be relevant here.
Right. So the connector also then goes in and reads that file back out.
Right. So it's going to point back to that and expects the same authentication that you would have had to access that in the first place, right?
And how do you prevent somebody from basically recreating the source data from the index in some way? I mean, if somebody grabbed the index or something like that.
Yeah. So I mean, again, the expectation here is all around the same security parameters that you would have. So most people with Qlik are integrating their IDP into Qlik, right? So they're embedding their authentication there, and then in Qlik we use what's called space management. So spaces are kind of like security areas where you can have content inside of there, and the users or the groups that you add to a space, they might be able to edit it, they might be able to consume data in it, they might be able to just have read-only permissions, right? So you do complete space and security curation through IDP and through spaces.
And the source documents are tied to a space?
So only if you upload them in there.
Okay.
So if it's an external source that you've connected to, we're not bringing those into the space.
Okay.
We're still pointing you back to that source, and you have to have authenticated into the source, right?
Because if you can't authenticate into the source once you've pointed to it.
Well, in theory, I guess you either need to check with the person who's
User frustration.
you either need to ask, either you're not supposed to have permission to that source, or you need to request the right permissions, right?
Better question: what if the data is deleted?
So in theory, if you have your scheduling set up here correctly, then that should have been accounted for in the indexing process. If a file gets deleted in the source and we do our scheduled check, then it will drop that file from the indexing. So it's no longer part of the index to answer questions because it was deleted at the source.
So that's super important because of the notion of so when you had the earlier question, you had tell me the something for whatever number of quarters.
Mm-hmm.
That's assuming the person's even going to know to ask, or put the context of quarters.
Mm-hmm.
Most people just ask a general question and they'll get I'm not saying I've used other tools, but they'll get that back. And so it's this as long as your scheduler, you're saying, is it's not magic. You still have to operationally think about what you're feeding it.
Yeah. So, if you need you have to ramp up the frequency to be doing those checks at a cadence at which you think documents might be getting deleted. And same problem with any data product. It requires someone to provide curated, clean data to get good information and answers, right? So you still have to have someone responsible for making sure that what's going in here and what's being used by the system is something that you feel is the right answers, the right information for them to use, right?
So the PDF example, those are probably, you could copy and paste the text. It's not necessarily like someone that wrote flat images that were saved as images and then pasted back into a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
That they're going to somehow exfiltrate.
Yeah.
So these are ideal examples that we're seeing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's what would actually probably happen in a wider enterprise setting where you're going to have wondrous variation.
Mm-hmm.
But this example that you just gave, this demo, that was literally 2 documents in this.
So in the second one I added,
Second was this. You added the competitive intel.
Yeah, which is probably more like 100 documents just for Power BI, right?
Got it.
And then I have, I had another knowledge that product information knowledge base is 9,007 pages, right? So it's access
That's
to
a page turner, I bet.
Yeah, but now imagine you expect someone to go find an answer in 9,007 pages, right? Now they can just ask the question and we will find the answer for them in that corpus of documents, right?
And I assume that it can handle different revisions and things like that. Because I'm thinking a support database, you might have, 30 different revisions of the same document.
Yep. So indexing process, it's going to check to see if there was a change. And if there's a change, then the index gets updated to the most updated version of the document.
Is that relayed to the user too in the sources? That this is version 1.234?
Yeah. As of November of 1997, this is what we support.
That's important, right?
Yeah. So.
Or is it something you have to?
There's again completely a curation question, right? Because there's probably maybe you decide that you keep all the versions and make those accessible, or you just say, okay, what is the purpose of this tool? If the purpose of this tool is to give the most relevant, up-to-date answer, right? Then you're going to say, I only want that latest version in the repository that is being indexed.
Not in enterprise IT, trust me. They want all the
Yeah, well,
just by hand many a time.
I think it's relevant, right? Like I asked the same question of another vendor who has got a lot of product documentation, and the last 3 or 4 versions are still in support, and you can imagine, someone's running version X through Y, and to be able to talk with the product documentation, if you're always talking with the latest, then sometimes there might be new product or features that just aren't in the version you're using.
That's
so being
right.
able to pass that context through is, hey, I'm currently using version 8. Give me relevant information for that period of time or that version.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we envision I'm talking futures and roadmaps, so, don't hold me to anything here. But I think we envision a world where maybe you can start to get more creative with prompts, right? And say like, okay, like maybe I want to configure how the prompt is being constructed in the back end, that you may do something like that, right? Like using the latest version of something, do this thing, right? But as of today, it's just kind of a fixed prompt that we're using, right?
Does it, if it can't find information because it's not there, are those errors collected? Because that seems like a really gold mine.
Yeah, so
Content.
great question. So all of the interactions that are happening here, so a couple things I'll point out. Conversation starter, so you can also curate, when someone starts a new chat, what are some of the questions they might ask, give them kind of a feel for how to approach this stuff. And then the second is history here, where we can actually come in and see the conversations, the questions that are being asked, right? We can see the documents that are being referenced in those questions. And then what we can start to do is in our knowledge base, we can actually start to curate, it's not added there yet, but we can actually start to curate regular answers, right? So if we see this,
Capital of Kansas is.
yeah. So we start to see like, look, people keep asking about the freaking capital of Kansas, right? So maybe we go add to our knowledge base a fixed answer to that, right? When this question comes in, here is the answer that we should be giving, right? Or you always give the example of when someone comes and asks, should I upgrade my iPhone at Apple? What's the dollar value of the?
That's a $200 billion question. I mean, they sell $100 billion worth of revenue a year. Apple iPhones, 50% of revenue. So that's a lot of money. And so like if and we're just making this up, if Apple had something like this deployed on a system, like they want their product marketing person to answer that question. They don't want a GPT model to answer that question. And so you want to give enterprises the ability to control or override a GPT answer. And so in that instance, someone comes in and says, should I upgrade my iPhone? Regardless of how they ask it, because you could do similarity to match into that question, return with the product marketing response. Don't return with the GPT response. And you can use that to, again, give enterprises control, but then you can also use that as a content strategy for filling the gap until you create content.
Yeah, that's good.
And so knowledge management person says, someone keeps asking this question. Let's actually give them that answer here as a fixed response, but then let's write something as underlying new content that we add to our knowledge base, remove that question as the fixed response, and now just generate from here, and we just continue to update that document.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of value we found at Kindy, and we'll see this again with Qlik Answers, I imagine, is that the value to the end user is getting my answer quickly. Value back to the knowledge management person is know what people are asking of your knowledge base, because you were just guessing before. You wrote content, pushed it, hope people consume it. Now you actually
Please give me 1 through 5 stars.
Now you know, hey,
Why
I was off a little bit, right? Oh, I actually need to shift over, and they're asking more about this product. Or
Yeah, and to that point, right? So feedback collection system. So I come in here, I see this answer, I say, you know what, actually, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I come and we can start to collect the information. Like, is it inaccurate? Is it repetitive? Right? Is it irrelevant? You can start to collect that information. So above all, this is a vessel to kind of understand the heartbeat of what's being asked, the content that's needed, and then maybe now you go curate new content to answer some of these questions that you just didn't know existed before, right?
Yeah. So when you started with your 2 or 4 personas, depending on how you do the math, this is appealing for that reason too, because you've built that also in. It's not one more thing I have to Franken pipeline and then figure out how to jam some other kind of like product feedback telemetry into the system.
Yep.
exactly.
Okay.
And then Ryan was talking about embeddability. The reality is people are not going into Qlik to consume that information, right? They're living in other tools like Salesforce, right? So now we can take something like Salesforce, and you can see inside of the account object here, we've embedded the chat assistant, right? So I can come in and say, I'm talking to this customer right now on the phone. We're having a live call, and they just said, well, why do you guys keep talking about the associative engine? What does that mean? Why is it unique? So now, because we have our product information tied into this, right? It's able to go find that answer and give the answer in Salesforce, right? So this tool lives where the people are looking for the information, whatever that might be. It's embeddable in all these different places, right?
Important. Because the cognitive switch isn't there. You don't have to go anywhere. It's right there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, you're reducing like a BDR toil immensely, and yeah, something like that.
All right, we're going to change worlds.
Oh man, context switch.
Context switch. So I had a slide for this. I'll just tell you what the slide said. We've been talking generative AI up to this point, right? Which is all about novel content curation, question and answering systems, kind of being able to natural language ask questions, get new curated data responses. We're now moving into the world of predictive AI, where we're moving, or another term for it, discriminative AI, right? Where I have questions that are being asked with fixed outcomes. I need to be able to label things a certain way and be able to predict the outcome that's going to occur in the future. I want to learn patterns in historical data, structured data, and then forecast those going forward. So we're going to move into the world of auto ML and some of the improvements that we've made in there. So what we'll do is we'll just start building an experiment here in my tenant. Again, it's going to make me log in again. All right, so ML experiment, we'll call this one churn. I'll just take you through a really simple churn example today. We're going to add a data set in our catalog, come down and say, I want to be able to predict this column here. So I'm going to choose this column that had historical information on customers that have churned or are still with us, right? So this is a structured data set. I've kind of brought together all this information. You can see there's chat summaries that have happened. So these chat interactions that have happened between a customer service agent and a customer. We have all the details about this customer. What day did they sign up? What price are they paying? What plan are they on? How are they using the product? So lots of really good structured information that we've brought together into a data set here. And we want to say, go learn patterns in this, and then tell me what of my current customers are likely to churn and why, right? So we have fixed outcomes here. In this case, we're doing binary classification. So yes or no, true or false type questions. We can also solve multi-class, so where you have more than 2 distinct categories. So for example, customer came in and bought a product from me today, but I have 5 other products I can sell to them. And I want to know which one they're most likely to buy from that list of products. So that's a multi-class type question. And then finally, regression, numerical questions. So how much am I going to sell of this product in the next month? How many days will it be until this opportunity converts? So things where we have a continuous number rather than a discrete category to predict into. So I chose my target here. AutoML starts doing a bunch of work for me automatically, right? That's the auto of the AutoML. So high cardinality, you can see the account ID. It's unique to every row. It's not predictive. We're going to strip that out so that maybe a layman user and person that's new to predictive modeling wouldn't know to remove that, but we want to make sure they're building the best model they can. We've taken all the categorical columns and done what's called categorical encoding. So for example, plan type, I have 4 different values in there. Normally, as a data engineer, I need to go and create 1 column for every plan, give it a 1 or a 0 flag. It's called one-hot encoding, right? We'll do all of that work for you automatically. So you just provide the column that has the answer in it, the information, and we'll make sure it's structured correctly. We extract all the relevant features from dates. I think you all have probably used Excel at some point. You've plugged a date into Excel and it turned into a number, right? That's all a computer sees a date as. It's a timestamp from some point in time, right? It's a fixed data point. It doesn't understand, like us humans, that there are repeatable labels in there for seasonality, month, week of the year, the day of the week. So we'll extract all those components out so that the model can actually interpret that information. And then finally, when we have a field like this that is a chat conversation between someone or an open text field, we'll do TF, IDF, or bag of words free text engineering on it. So we'll kind of extract the keywords in there to make sure that we're kind of identifying ones that are unique to this record so that we can say, hey, when this word appears, it's a rare occurrence and it's tied to this outcome, right? So we want to use that as a feature in our model here. Everything else, AutoML's automated for me. Algorithm selection, feature pre-processing, and then what our newest feature that we're highlighting here at Connect called intelligent model optimization, right? So what we're doing is saying, choose your target, hit run, and we're going to go through the process of making sure that we're removing features that don't belong, things that maybe have high feature correlation. There's a what we call data leakage. We're giving the answer somehow to the model that shouldn't be in there. Anything with low importance. So a bunch of stuff that's just giving statistical noise. It's filler. It's not really adding any predictive value. It's adding unnecessary complexity to the model. We'll strip that out. Anything that's missing too many values or sparse data or maybe constants, we're removing all of that to make sure that when you hit this run button, that you end up with the best version of the model that you can get on first pass, right? So that you're not kind of having to learn, when do I drop stuff? When do I add stuff? How do I iterate this? We want to make sure you get to a better model faster and start deploying stuff into the business, because the real value is getting these answers back into the business and implementing into the organization. All right, I'm not going to make you watch model training, so I ran one just a little bit earlier. To be realistic though, this takes maybe like 60 seconds on this process, right? So benefit of using the Qlik Cloud that we always pitch is that you have access to our distributed compute environment, right? So we are scaling up the model workers to concurrently train 8 algorithms in parallel, and we're making them the right size for your data set. So if you have a big data set, we're putting an XL model worker on it. If you have a smaller data set, we're putting a smaller one on there. But point being, we get you models faster, so that we worked with a customer a couple days ago, same exact data set. They're using it in a cloud, a hyperscalers ML tool, and it took 6 hours because they didn't want to pay for 8 parallel machines running side by side that were big enough to train it fast enough. And then they found out there was a leaky feature, had to drop it, run it all again, 6 hours to get the next version.
I think I remember from AI Field Day, but can you confirm how the licensing works? I think experiments were included, and then any published app you pay for or something?
Yeah, so today how it works is unlimited experimentation. So you can run as many experiments as you want. There is no compute passed to you as a user. Our licensing model is on deployed models. So let's say you run 100 experiments and you've determined that 2 of them actually mean something to the business and drive real value. I want to deploy those 2 models. That's when a licensing event occurs. Okay.
So hypothesis for free, but when it starts making dollars and cents.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. The idea here is I don't want you to feel penalized finding the right business case, right? I want you to explore every nook and cranny, find all the possible business value that you can out of this, and then when you turn that into business value and deploy it into the business is when we're going to share the relationship there, right? Okay. Okay, so you can see here it went through, it trained a bunch of models in parallel, it found the best one. In this top right corner, it said, okay, here are all the things that I did for you automatically, right? So I dropped a couple features because they had high correlation, they were overfitting the model. I dropped some stuff because they had low permutation importance. They weren't actually driving predictions, and so they were just providing statistical noise. And then it's giving us this chart down here with feature importance. So it's saying, here are the things that are actually driving here are the things that are making the model more accurate, right? These are the features that when we add these features in, we see large rise in accuracy that the model is giving us. And then down a little further, we have SHAP importance, which is actually saying here is the features that contributed to predictions at the row level, right? That's important. Everything we do with ML at Qlik is all about explainability and driving business value. And so these SHAP values are extremely important because I can't just go to someone and say, here's a prediction, you have to believe me. Don't ask questions, just do what the model says, right? Instead, I have to go and say, here is what we think is likely to happen, and here are the reasons why, right? Here are the 3 factors that are ultimately driving this predicted outcome that you can go take action on and try to do something about this so that this outcome doesn't occur because we don't want this customer to leave, right? Okay. Deploying the model, really easy. I hit deploy. I'll cover that here in a minute. Of course, again, demo world, right?
Just shows that it's live.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's probably an authentication thing, so I'm just going to skip ahead to this part here. So deployed the model. I have two possible outcomes. We can do a batch scheduled prediction, right? So I can point at a data set and say, every hour, this data set updates. So go grab it, apply predictions to the whole data set, and store that into my data catalog with the newest predictions. Alternatively, we also host a real-time API for you. So you can embed this anywhere in your organization. It does not have to be in Qlik. We have plenty of customers who actually have this running their day-to-day business operations. They are making real-time business decisions based on predictions that are coming from the real-time API that we're hosting for them. So a really powerful way to actually get ML into your business ops without having to write a single line of code. We haven't written a single line of code to this point.
Do you see any correlation on like the industry and their adoption of the real-time API versus the batch?
The batch is the low-hanging fruit, right? It's for those that maybe don't have complex ML operations today or even software engineering operations. The batch is the easiest go-to, right? Because again, you stay no code. You're using our UI to point it at a data set, updating that data set, and then you can do whatever you want with it. The more not complex organizations, but the more advanced organizations, especially in their ML journey, are using AutoML as a way to accelerate their product building, right? Because now they can get models built, deployed, hosted, and managed inside of Qlik, all no code, and then they just get the important piece, which is the API to actually build the software or whatever process that they're doing downstream.
Got it.
Okay. Just to highlight, back into the Qlik world though, so this is Qlik Sense, the analytics tool, and I highlight this because a lot of our users, especially on the automated machine learning side, still consume this information through some sort of BI or analytics tool, right? That's a go-to place for a lot of this kind of structured machine learning information. So now with this model embedded, I can come in and say, okay, well, let's look at this account that says they're flagged at risk of churn. I can now look and see the exact reasons that this person was predicted at risk of churn, and that's not a good zoom in there, but so you can see here that my inclination as an account manager might have been, oh, let's just call them and give them a discount, right? That'll make them happy. Model says the base fee that we're charging them is already reducing their risk of churn. So giving them a discount is not going to move the needle. You need to focus your attention on the plan type, right? That's the problem with this particular customer. And so then we can test our hypothesis with, we have a real-time integration to that API inside of the analytics tool here. So I can come and say, well, what if they were on the blue plan? And you'll notice this KPI in real time up here in the purple actually start to change as I plug new values in. So I plug a new value in there, I get a new prediction every time I plug information in. So a really powerful way to give end users the ability to talk and interact with the machine learning model without having to do any software engineering, right? It's all natural Qlik Sense, what's the word I'm looking for? Native Qlik Sense visualizations and tools connected now with machine learning from the AutoML side. And then we take that a step further. That embedding works in the prescriptive world as well, right? So I can come in here and say, I can sit there all day and play with the price, change all the plan types. Or Qlik Sense, why don't you just generate a visual for me that shows all these different variations in price, from a 90% discount to a 100% increase, and run predictions for all the possibilities, and then show me in a nice chart what that looks like. Or a combination of plans and price, and find kind of this sweet spot for me, right? That I can, if I get a customer onto the green or purple plan, I have room to grow revenue by 10 to 25% and keep the risk of churn under 5%, right? So now we've just done the work of optimizing the answer for the end user, so that they can now go make the decision they need to faster. Okay? That's, you know what I did not cover? Nick's probably back there like saying like, what are you doing? Is I didn't cover our new embedded analytics capability in the AutoML tool. So one of the big changes, oh man. So now, instead of having to go straight to an analytics app, directly in the ML experiment itself, we will automatically generate for you dashboards and charts to help you compare the information that's coming out of these models, right? So you can see here just really simple comparison stuff to look at all the different scores we're getting from our machine learning models. But more importantly, we're giving you this analysis tab that will let you start to get insights into what the models learn. So without even having to deploy your experiment, you're able to say, okay, tell me which plan types are driving high churn versus keeping customers around, right? At what base fee do we see a spike in customers being at risk of churn versus sticking around long term? So this kind of embedded analytics ability is giving users the ability to understand and visually get representations of what the model's learning without ever having to hit deploy and consume a user license for deploy, right? So it's making sure that you're completing the entire value lifecycle inside of the experiment before you have to use a license. All right. I think I've covered most of the stuff. So I'll let Nick come back up here and kind of button things up. And
yeah, so I just wanted to summarize here real quick where we're at with in terms of, as you heard, generative AI with Qlik Answers is a new opportunity to exploit unstructured content. Kyle just went through the discriminative or predictive, which AutoML has been in our Qlik Cloud product now for 2 years. And one thing I wanted to point out here is we're now in a position to start converging these two worlds, right? Unstructured and unstructured analysis under one analytics experience, which I think is a new foray, something that we're super excited about in terms of our roadmap and vision. Okay, well that was just a small sample of what we shared here at Connect. We probably could have been here for a lot longer, even though we were here for quite a while talking about these new capabilities. You guys asked really good questions about answers. Certainly we're going to talk further about that after the show. I guess, as to wrap this up, I'm very appreciative of the time that we've spent with you guys over the last, call it 6 months. And as you can see here, we've got a very aggressive journey that we're on, making AI a reality all the way from the data foundation to how we include that in our analytics and data experiences, and then tapping into these new opportunities with structured and unstructured data. So with that, I'll conclude and say thank you again, and talk to you guys all soon.